when I'm teaching my classes, I always say that, if anybody tells you that slavery was about the cotton that they grew or the tobacco that they grew or the rice that they grew, not to say that that had nothing to do with it, but the greatest commodity that came out of it was the enslaved people and the value that that labor brought to the table. And that totally connects to what you're saying about the humanity of it all.
Yeah, I mean, there's another link to that, particularly where I am. So at Francis Marion, we have recently, within the last 2 years, put in a historical marker honoring Black rice growers. Now, most people think of rice being grown on the coast, right? Not in the interior where we are. And it wasn't grown where we are by plantation, right? For plantation agriculture. It was not grown to be sold in mass to benefit a white person. It was actually grown by the enslaved and formerly enslaved people as a way to stay in touch with their past, right? They were very proud that African peoples brought that knowledge across the Atlantic, and they wanted to keep growing the rice to keep that going, sharing that knowledge to other generations. And a researcher, long before I came here, she had sat down and she had talked to and recorded oral histories with some of the descendants of these rice growers. She went out and found where they had grown rice and things like that. And so she had actually put aside the money to pay for that historical marker. And then we had an event where we honored those people, where they could come, their descendants could come, and we could share their names and try to make sure that people remember those elements where, yes, slavery was economic, but there's also something in that growing of stuff that was also a connection back to heritage, to home, and maintenance through that. And that, to me, as an outsider who had studied slavery and had always associated rice with the coast and that kind of thing, to learn about rice production here, both wet and dry, that was completely fascinating to me. I was just like, that's amazing, right? The retention of the knowledge and the importance in that, pride in it. That was really, really something very impactful, right? It makes you take a pause and think about it. So yeah, I do think that's actually interesting that you bring up the economic part. This week, one of my colleagues asked me to come in and talk about, there was a study done in 1974 by two scholars who used quantitative methodology, right? Numbers, just pure numbers, to talk about slavery. They were Fogel and Ingerman, and they caused quite an uproar because people were angry with their research, because they were trying to say, based on numbers, that slavery wasn't so cruel as we say it is, because they had found some plantation records about the number of times people were whipped, and they're like, oh, they weren't whipped very much, so it wasn't so bad. And oh, they were provided with food and clothing, so they were taken care of. And if they were a commodity, then enslavers wouldn't have treated them badly.